Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome on a chilly day to this council meeting. Just quite a significant meeting in that we are going to be adopting our long-term plan, something which we've been working on for the last 9-10 months. It certainly seems like it's been a very long time. So thank you in advance to all of the people who have done what they've done to be able to get this to us today. Before we get into that item though, I'll just first of all take any apologies. We do have Councillor Kingham joining us by Zoom, so he's not an apology and such, but are there any other apologies? No, okay. Any declarations of interest? None. So do we have anyone for public forum? No, that's all good as gold. Okay, so first of all, who's going to confirmation of the minutes from the council meeting held on the 11th of May? Would someone like to move those? Councillor Hopkins, thank you. Second, Councillor McRoby. Any comments on those? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard. There is a matter. It doesn't relate to the content of the minutes per se. Well, it does, but not requiring a correction. There's a couple of grammatical ones that I've emailed through to the governance advisor, but there's something I'd like to discuss about the way the minutes are being recorded, but it applies to the public excluded ones as well as these. So if it's with your permission, I'd ask if we could do it then, if that's a possibility.
Yeah, no, that'll be fine.
Thank you.
Okay, no other comments? I'll put those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, that's carried. And then for the minutes from the council meeting on the 15th of June. Councillor Tavendale, Councillor Wallstein, any comments on those? Okay, I shall put those in favour of those being adopted, please say aye. Aye. And against, that's carried. Okay, moving on to my mayor's report on page 28. Relatively high level, a lot of big things going on at the moment, so I really focused on a lot of that, the exception being the Mahino Memorial Steps, which is a relatively small project, but one that we've basically worked with community to make it happen. And I just thank Councillor Percival for his good work in discussions with the Wairika Valley Lions Club and helping to make that project happen. Something that was going to be cost $16,000 to repair. The Lions have been able to do it for a couple of $1,000s. So I've just got a recommendation in there that we basically fund that from the RMA Reserves Fund, and that we send a letter of appreciation to the Waianakarua Lions Club to thank them. So we'll just deal with this one first. So I'll move the recommendations there. Would someone like to second those? Councillor Tavendale. Thank you. Any discussion on that? Councillor Wallstein.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. No, well done to the Lions Club. But just to check, which Lions Club are we talking about? There's two there, Wairika Valley Lions and Waianakarua Lions.
Sorry.
Yes, so just make sure we are talking about the right one.
Yeah, I was reading on the second one. So it is Wairika Valley. It should be on both those. So yeah, apologies for that one. Okay, we'll put those in favour. So we do that. Please say aye. Aye. And those against, that's carried. Thank you. So quick updates. So as mentioned, we've got our new chief executive is in the country. He's in quarantine with his family, having a great old time, I'm sure. 4 kids under 9 years old. Be great bonding time. My understanding is that that finishes on this Thursday, and he'll be travelling to Dunedin and then driving from Dunedin. So fingers crossed that the weather has improved by then. It's certainly forecast to, and that they get through all right. it's a bit chilly, but as someone said yesterday, it's a bit like the middle of an English summer, so it should be all right. They will be basically he'll be taking a couple of weeks to get settled in with his family, and still scheduled to start here on the 19th of July. In the meantime, we have Paul Hope ably carrying out the role, and just want to acknowledge that, as I have in here, just the work that Paul and the team have done to keep things ticking along in what has been quite a very tricky, very busy time. So thank you, Paul. Other than that, just there's mention of all of the reforms going on at the moment. This is the busiest time for local government we've probably had for 30 plus years. So it has a huge impact on elected members and staff throughout the country. But we're making progress on some of the various aspects of it. Just on the Three Waters, had a National Council meeting yesterday. It was a very short notice one where we were discussing some of the elements that Cabinet are going to be deciding on. So some decisions are just right around the corner on that one. Today, all councillors and mayors and regional council chairs and CEs have been invited to a embargoed webinar. We'll be finding out more of the detail on what possible entities might look like, how many there will be, how they'll be structured and so on. So councillors will be all joining that webinar and basically being able to find out a lot more detail at that time. And then there'll be an official announcement, I believe, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock on that. So that's probably the main things there, just covering them off in a bit of wee bit more detail, but hopefully, yeah, if anyone's got any questions, happy to answer them if I can. Is there anything? Nothing? Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher. Just a couple of points. I noticed on page 31 talks about the RMA, Resource Management Reform, and talks about how there needs to be an improvement in how when its officials engage with local government, especially the territorial authorities. So does that mean he now actually realises that we actually are here and we do some work? He needs to come and talk to us. So that's most welcomed. And but I was going to say another point too is that on your page 33 regarding the Three Waters, and you believe the case for change has probably been made for most councils. But whether the proposed solutions are the best way forward is another matter altogether. And that's followed up a little bit later by a comment about the financing, the next page, where Waiteki is the formation of where you talk about the formation of a taxpayer-funded system akin to Waka Kotahi to provide funding. And to me, that's the basis of the whole thing. Local government, territorial authorities could do the job if we had the money available to us. Then we don't, and TAs don't have the power to borrow money such as the government does. And therefore the government can fund up and do these major improvements that are required, whereas the local government, territorial authorities cannot do so. So it's to me, it's gilding the lily with what they're doing when it could have been done without all the major changes required. But as you said, we'll find out more this afternoon. I'll wait with basic brief to find out what we can find out.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, yeah, but the funding issue, I mean, we are better than many councils are, and so I think that's thanks to the last 20-something years of making sure we're funding the depreciation well, and so on. There's no doubt that there's going to be higher standards that we're going to have to lift to, but equally within our numbers, there's also growth predictions, and that's something that would normally be paid for through development contributions as we get more properties joining on to schemes. So there's it's not about having to cover all of the cost through rates, and it's we're going to be having a more focused session on Waiteki's case is it next Tuesday, I think. So that we'll have a chance to get into our numbers in much more detail. But yeah, there's some assumptions that have been made, such as that we won't have any growth over the next 10 years, which are patently incorrect. So we'll be asking some strong questions about that. There's from the standards point of view, we're in a good position. There are councils that are still not necessarily treating water well enough, that need to treat it better, the wastewater, and that are discharging to rivers and the sea, and they're going to have to stop. Now, they've got some major problems and got some major costs ahead of them. Our 8 wastewater schemes all discharge to land, and so we're already ahead on that point. So even if we've got to lift standards, you know, we've got most of the parts of the puzzle already there. So as I say, we are better off than most. When it comes to the likes of a financially assisted roading rate, which we get with Waka Kotahi, to have something like that, which is able to help us fund those very small communities where it's a very small ratepayer base, but quite an expensive upgrade, like our village or some of the rural schemes that we've still got left to do water upgrades on. Just some subsidy like that will take the pain out of it, and doesn't need to be a lot of money. You know, we're talking, you know, some millions of dollars. We're certainly not talking a huge amount overall, but it would just help us with those and make sure that we keep rates affordable. So anyway, we'll see how things go. I think the government is set on its particular path. I think they took a very major step backwards, and in the advertising that started last week. I made mention of that on my Facebook page. The advertising, which was in the Oamaru Mail, for example, the full page ad they took in the Oamaru Mail, that Councillor Hopkins also has over there, is absolutely appallingly extreme propaganda. Yeah, picturing a New Zealand with where basically you don't, you know, any water delivered to your taps isn't going to be able, you're not going to be able to use. There's no point showering because you're going to get dirty. I mean, it's just alarmist rubbish, and we deserved a lot better from central government than a campaign based on such rubbish and propaganda. That we were supposed to be working in partnership with them, and this has absolutely gone against that. So as we're talking yesterday at National Council about what compensation councils might get, to me, I mean, the price has gone up because they've absolutely damaged reputation of councils like Waitaki, which generally have a very good reputation on water and wastewater. So it's something we're dealing with. I think the Minister is getting plenty of feedback from the sector, a lot of letters going, including a joint South Island Councils one. So all of the local authorities in the South Island sending that, and a lot of individual councils and mayoral forums and so forth as well. They've certainly are getting the message that this was a really bad start to a campaign to let the public know what's happening with water. So yeah, that's where we're at. And Councillor Hopkins, you'd like to add something to that, I believe.
Well, I had intended to mention the ads, and I'm very glad you have. They are outrageous. Wonderful that the Oamaru Mail got the fee for the full page. Nice to see the community newspaper of the year getting that sort of support, but it's just shocking. I mean, the problem is we're stuck with a government that I can't see will back down. They've gone too far, and these ads indicate that they won't budge on the matter. And that's my suspicion and belief, that they've created a vastly expensive overreaction to the Havelock North situation. If you look at, in this COVID-dominated world, when was the last time anyone was hospitalised with a water-related illness in New Zealand, other than since that event? The answer is no one has been. And I think we should fight fire with fire. Personally, I would like to see you seeing if we can persuade a few other mayors and local authorities, perhaps the regional, rural and provincial sector, to actually take our own full page ad out. And it would start with the headline, "Tell the Truth, Minister." Most of the water, virtually all the water that New Zealanders receive or use and get is clean, safe and fit for purpose. We tell the story of what we're doing well, then push back. They own this space by paying for it, and we can fight back. And the only way we can effectively fight back, in my view, is by doing the same thing. Buy some space, own it, and then we can say what we want. And I think the sector should. I think the sector should blow a very large, noisy raspberry in the government's direction.
Yeah, I think anyone can point at parts of the system which aren't working, and but what they've done is done that, and then they've taken it to an extreme, and I think that's just dishonest, to be very fair. I mean, if local government wanted to take out as part of a review of central government a full page ad like that, and we started talking about mental health and state highways and various things, yeah, you could paint a very bleak picture there as well. It doesn't serve any purpose. The campaign is intended to inform the community about what Three Waters is really about: the drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. And the challenge that we have as a country, making sure that everyone does have good, safe water. Problem is, we're a country of a bit under 5 million people. 800,000 people are not getting safe drinking water. The great majority of those are not on council supplies. They're on their own supplies or private schemes, and that's something I think that the government seriously underestimated when they started looking at it. They said, how many private schemes are there? I think this number started off about 3,000. It was 5,000. It's now 75,000 that they're talking about people on private schemes, and the discussions we're having aren't dealing with those problems, other than maybe they'll get absorbed into some big entities and everyone else will subsidise those ones because they've been having cheap water up to now, and that's the way the system will work. But that's something that's not being talked about. There's all of those who are on council schemes are much better protected than those who aren't. Anyway, Councillor Tavendale.
It was a real shame, I guess, to see that their opportunity to actually explain to the wider community, which is the role we didn't want to take as councils, because this is a government reform they're talking through. And we've very much said to them, we don't want to be going out and having to talk to our communities about this when you're pushing that on us, and you need to explain the need for it. And I think that was a real lost opportunity for them when they kind of went down a bit more of a childish route to, write sort of Dr. Seuss style pictures in the newspaper, rather than actually put some arguments, some explanation behind the figures and the reasoning behind it. At the end of the day, we want whatever's best for our community, and the package is still something worth discussing at the end of it, because water is going to be becoming increasingly more expensive. And we talk, if we ever talk about the third water in there that we're all ignoring, or not us ignoring, it's more government ignoring, that's going to be another level as well. So we've got a long way to go, and I think we've got to be careful not to let this distract from the big discussion and decision we've got in front of us, that we've got to make not the best decision necessarily for council, but actually the best decision for our community, which may not be the same two decisions, and that's still to be seen. But it's just a shame that your opportunity to actually get that discussion happening with some facts and figures, because we're not getting the opportunity to go out and talk to our communities about this, because they've constricted the time frame so much. They've taken the requirement, unless we say no and opt out, we won't be needing to talk to our communities about this, and that's really wrong. And this was the opportunity to actually do that explanation to the communities. And once you've taken that off the table, you've given them no actual information, and we're having to make a call very shortly. It's a bit of a disappointment.
Councillor McRovey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, I concur with what others have said. one of the things that really concerns me is that we've got a reputational risk that is now being damaged by a third party central government. And one of the things we must always do is try and protect that. So I like Councillor Hopkins' view of sort of kind of fighting back. And I think we really genuinely need to do that. But as a combined body of local government around the country, and I know that, you know, that's perhaps being worked on at the moment, but it also says to me, as part of our training, we are told not to have a predetermined view, and so we can consult, we discuss, we come up with a decision after all those factors have been taken into account. But in this particular case, is a predetermined view of where this is going. And that is so wrong in democracy. And that's the point I was trying to make a few months ago about our democratic right is almost being taken away from us with this approach by central government. And this advertisement read same thing. What the hell's going on? Where is the transparency and where is the partnership that we have been told that we would have with central government on this issue? And to me, that advertisement told me there was none. And so I would say fight back. That's my first statement. The second point I wanted to ask a question on actually is with the reduction in Waka Kotahi's funding, as highlighted on television last night, actually by Southland District Council, where they're closing bridges because they don't have funds to repair them or continue with them after flood events and so on. Are we affected in any way? I don't know who could answer this question, maybe our CEO. Are we affected in any way by not being able to carry out work like that, given this quite substantial shortfall in funding, even though we perhaps think we may have done okay out of it?
Yeah, we certainly are. I mean, this was the very late nature of the funding announcement from Waka Kotahi, and the level certainly significantly less than we estimated it to be, had a major impact on the long-term plan. But in terms of service delivery, yeah, it is interesting that the government is criticising local government for its lack of investment in core infrastructure, yet at the same time, certainly not coming to the party in terms of being a funding partner on a key piece of infrastructure across the country that, to be sort of mildly political, certainly has far more deaths attributed to it, you know, probably in a week compared to everything that's happening in the water space over a number of years. So, I mean, it's a real issue that we're facing, that we will have to make some tough decisions about where we allocate roading funding to actually ensure the best outcomes for the community.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so I'd like to move to receive the report, Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Percival. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? That's carried. Okay, moving on to item 6.1, recommendation of the Performance Audit and Risk Committee held on the 18th of May. So that's adopting the Treasury strategy. So Councillor Wallstein, you'll move that?
Yes, I'll move that.
And second, Councillor McRovey. Any comments? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, sorry, Mick, just a very brief one. This is more for the public and perhaps in future. It seems to me, given that this is potentially a big issue, application to increase the level of borrowings from 15 million to 25 standby facilities, it might have been helpful if the report that went to the committee had been repeated in the council agenda, because I rather suspect that people might come across this, see it in this agenda and just wonder about the context. So it's more, it used to be the case that recommendations would come with the reports that went with them. And every now and then, the next one, it wouldn't matter, it wouldn't be necessary, but I think in this instance, it might have been helpful. And I just flag that as something to be considered in future, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Councillor Tavadale?
I was just looking at the future requirements around funding, and we've mentioned that's a bit further down in another report, but it's sort of still linked to your strategy. we've mentioned going right up as far as 67 million, or I think it gets higher in the middle there somewhere. But also talking about how the role Three Waters plays in that. How much of that is Three Waters funding moving forward?
Probably, I'm looking at Mr. Wells, I'll take a guess and then he'll correct me. I would have said probably 80 or 90% of it relates to Three Waters. I mean, it is the key area of expenditure that we debt fund.
Yeah, it is very significant. I think that's one of the things that does need to be emphasised is as much as we, you know, when we get on the LTP, as much as we don't like some of the increases that are coming through, this is about spending a lot more on our key infrastructure, and it's there's a bit more on the other things that people don't see necessarily as key infrastructure, but the great majority is that, and you know, it's an investment that we basically need to make to keep up with rising standards. When it comes to water, there is a certain amount of growth built into there, so it's not that this debt all has to be serviced through rates. It can be serviced through development contributions and other funds coming into council. So yeah, it's not reflective of that. Even at 67 million, we are still a relatively unindebted council, if there's such a word, compared to many councils that have much higher debt levels. And you know, we want to stay that way, but equally we want to make sure we're investing sufficiently in our infrastructure to make sure it lasts well into the future, and that we can be proud of the level of our infrastructure. Councillor Tavendale.
I think it really does illustrate, though, this discussion around Three Waters that we're having at the moment, our whole treasury strategy and everything else we've got that underpins a lot of what we do. If you're talking about that much of our funding moving forward, going into that, you know, the disruption and the change in the look of what council is going to be at the end of all this, if we don't have water, is immense. And at that stage, after all this work, we can pretty much throw the long-term plan out and start again.
No, that's the other thing to mention is, yeah, I mean, we've been told to work on the basis that with our long-term plan that we will continue doing it. We've also been chipped by the auditor that we have made that assumption because there is this entity potentially being set up. But yeah, anyway, that's another story. As far as the debt goes, though, if there is another entity set up to look after water, so all of the assets go to that. So does any debt sitting against that. So whilst we're saying, you know, the long-term plan is saying we're going to still have that in 10 years' time, and we've got the debt that sits with that. The reality is there's a good chance that might not be there, so that debt will disappear as well. So yeah, it very much is a time where we've got to be flexible and you know, plan for a number of different eventualities. But yeah, as you pointed out earlier, Councillor, looking after our ratepayers is key to all of it, and making sure that we're doing the best by them that we possibly can. Anyway, that's quite a bit over a treasury strategy. So we're going to put the, oh, sorry, Councillor Morobe first.
Sorry, just Chair, just one more thing. We mustn't forget, while we often look at debt and think, oh, it's this or that, we must remember that our assets base is around about 1.2 billion with the revaluation. So we often lose sight of that. It was $1 billion. I think it's now gone to about 1.2, if I recall correctly. So in relation to the debt, it's pretty low, and the value of the assets. So just must put things in perspective. But thank you.
No, thank you. Councillor Wallstein.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. Just to add one other point to what Councillor McRobey said, also the increased debt, because it's being borrowed from the Local Government Funding Authority, LGFA, The rate of interest is very, very low. And council is borrowing a lot more money than it had in the past, but the actual cost to council is only minimally higher than the cost at present. So it's a big lot of extra capital at virtually no extra cost.
Very true. Thank you for that. I'm going to put it, those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And those against, that's carried. Okay, moving to the next item, which is the Biodiversity Fund. Basically agreeing that we're going to meet, or that fund applications for that fund will be dealt with twice a year, and changing the name of the fund from the Waitaki Biodiversity Condition Fund to the Waitaki Biodiversity Fund. Important change. Councillor Hopkins.
Happy to move, Mayor Kircher.
Okay, moves Councillor Hopkins, seconded Councillor McRoby. Any discussion? Pretty straightforward. Okay, those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against, that's carried. Thank you. Right, next one shouldn't take too long. Adoption of the 2021-31 long-term plan. Mr. Hope.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. Yeah, I'm going to make some probably briefer comments than I planned on, and then hand over to Mr. Searle just to work through the sequence of adopting and any other information. Firstly, I'd also like to acknowledge the critical contribution of some staff. I mean, it is all of council effort, but some people, like Animal Farm, put in far more effort than others. So certainly want to acknowledge Mr. Wells and Mr. Searle who are sitting at the table, Mr. McIntyre and McIntosh and Mitchell are sitting at the back, and Mr. Rendell and Mr. Marr, one who's missing and one who's here. Also the comms team, not only helping with the document, but putting together the engagement with the community, and then virtually everyone else in council at some stage put their fingerprints on budgets or some component of the plan. Also, yeah, I would like to acknowledge the efforts of the team from Audit New Zealand. They are put in a pretty enviable position at times because they need to respond to the requirements of the Office of the Auditor General, who is sort of acting at the bequest of Parliament. He is an officer of Parliament, and so sort of does their will, and then pushes that out for poor folks at Audit New Zealand to come and give us the bad news and the beatings and everything else. They really have worked exceptionally hard to help us get the opinion that we received this morning. And I've circulated to you, so yeah, just want to acknowledge them. I do need to talk about the opinion because there are some matters that you need to be aware of, and really to put them in context. So in the opinion, there are 4 matters of emphasis. These aren't really like tags or qualifications that you used to get in audit opinions. These are matters, as I say, that the person issuing the audit opinion believes a reader of the document should be aware of because of their potential significance. And those 4 items are uncertainty over the 3 water reforms, which we've already talked about, uncertainty over external funding of capital projects. The main one they're talking about is the Sports and Events Centre. Well, we thought that was well covered in the document, but they just wanted to emphasise really the potential impact of being unable to secure third-party funding would have on the project. Uncertainty over Three Waters infrastructure asset forecasts. Again, this is a reasonably technical item saying that, yeah, this is a big item. We have to make a lot of estimates about it, and therefore, you know, they could be wrong and have a significant impact on the result, especially in the out years. And then the last one, uncertainty over delivery of the capital program. And this is really just saying that virtually every council has increased significantly the amount they are intending to invest. And particularly in Otago and Southland, they see supply constraints with other major work going on, particularly the Dunedin Hospital, that really there could be problems securing appropriate contractors, but we believe we are in a good position, particularly with Whitestone and some of the other contractors that are based here to deliver that work. So again, they're just emphasising those matters. Did make some notes here. Right, I had really just one comment before I pass over to Mr. Searle. The intent of the long-term plan is set out in the Local Government Act, and the key ones that I believe are that we are trying to achieve with this are a coordinated decision-making and setting up a basis of accountability for the community. If anyone dives into any part of it or actually read all 542 pages of the long-term plan, they would develop a really good understanding of what council does, what it's trying to achieve, how it funds things, and pretty much everything else that we do. It does have a purpose, and that purpose is incredibly important. What the challenge we face is actually getting the document itself together. It's an incredibly complex document that requires a lot of work to pull together to make sure it's consistent and then actually readable at the end of it. So it's hard to pull together and it's hard to audit. So that's why the efforts of the team to get this together have been so outstanding. But I have to say, if we're looking at the future for local government, if there isn't some reform of the LTP process, then we are really missing out on actually making this document and process far more accessible. Because at the moment, I think we would have to say it really does fail the effectiveness and efficiency test that local government is supposed to operate under. I think it's really illustrated by one of the sections, when it was originally drafted. So section 93, which was one of the most important sections, it was section 93. It is now section 93 and then section 93A through section 93G. So that's just an indication of all the extra pieces that have been added into the long-term planning process with virtually nothing removed. It's just now supposed to be the answer for everything, and it almost ends up being the answer for nothing. So, but yeah, it is better than the bad old days when we had to print these things, and so we'd come into the council meeting, 500 pages in front of everybody. They'd look at it, then we'd have to pick them up because it wasn't the final document, throw them in the bin and print it all over again. So, one big improvement is that we can now email it to you, but there's certainly a whole lot of other improvements that need to be made to make the whole process more effective and actually more transparent and penetrable. So that's my little rant from the chair, because I won't get to sit here for very long, so I won't have too many opportunities. But over to you, Mr. Searle.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mayor Kircher. After Paul's introduction of what the long-term plan and everything is about, I think we can probably go straight into discussing the recommendations and the attachments. So I think we start with the recommendations because there are some changes as advised to us by Audit New Zealand the last couple of days. So recommendation 1 is just that we note the rate increase that was confirmed at the 15th of June council meeting. Recommendation 2 is the audit report, which has been tabled and sent to you by Mr. Hope this morning. So no changes there. Recommendation 3 is we adopt the long-term plan, and I point out at this stage that what you have in front of you is what we call in the policy speak as a Word version. So there's not a lot of pretty pictures in that particular document. We have done that through efficiency and the amount of times we go back and forward to Audit New Zealand. We didn't want to get our comms team involved in the flash design. It just adds a lot of administration. So between now and when we're required to publicly make the document available, which is the 29th of July, we'll be just making that a little bit more pretty than the version you see in front of you. Recommendation 4. So this is where we are looking at slight change. Oh, no, can I just go back to recommendation 2? So that reads, receives the Audit New Zealand report on the draft long-term plan. So Audit New Zealand want us to include the word audit before the word report. So they want us to say receives the Audit New Zealand audit report. So just a one-word change to that particular recommendation.
Just a quick question. Do they give us other reports?
No, they do not. On On to recommendation 4. This is where I want to be able to have the ability to make minor changes to the way the document looks in terms of its publication and any typos that we may pick up between now and before we make it publicly available. My words were, I want to make final non-material changes and corrections. Audit New Zealand didn't like those words, non-material changes. So the recommendation will now read, note that officers may make necessary minor edits and corrections. So I've changed that recommendation. As I pointed out before, we now have to make, once we adopt, we've got 1 month until we make the document publicly available. So even though that's 29th of July, our team will be making every effort to make that publicly available as soon as we possibly can. And then the final recommendation is we have put in here for your information the fees and charges which come into effect on the 1st of July. That is not part of the long-term plan. It's just here for your information.
Just on that, it's not just for our information, we are required to adopt them. The fees and charges.
I think it's just receive and note, isn't it? Have they been adopted elsewhere? So there's no delegation for officers to set those fees and charges, is it? My understanding, it was a formal delegation, but I'm prepared to re-correct on that.
Councillor Hopkins?
No, just hold, mate.
Sorry, Councillor Holding, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to have a similar question because I think there's some in there that are query if I just want to know if there was a council resolution for them to be changed prior to this through a committee.
You haven't done the fees and charges prior to now. Have you? You haven't done the fees and charges prior to now, have you? No.
I don't believe there's any issue if the word adopted is inserted into recommendation 6. I mean, but these are just at a point in time, I mean, and council then can adjust them at any point after this.
Yeah, I've certainly got some suggestions about how we make some changes today, but we'll get into those in due course. Councillor Hopkins?
Well, no, thank you, Mayor Kircher. To my mind, this is quite important, and it's not sufficient just to receive and note them. We either say today that there are things that we want changed and set aside and establish a process by which that will happen, and what will happen between now and then, or we adopt them as they are. And I personally, along with you, and I think Councillor Holding, I'm not willing to do that. This is up to us. This is ultimately a governance call. The fees and charges are part of the costing processes and the funding processes of the council, and they've always been something that we've gone through and signed off on ultimately. And last couple of years they've been produced late or quite late in the piece, and we've been assured that we can kind of revisit them anytime we like, but the revisiting's never happened. Well, I just think we need to be a bit more, we need to accept our obligation and responsibility. It's tedious, it's tiresome, but it's part of what we are paid to do and what we should do as guardians of the ratepayer and residents' purse strings.
Councillor Taverneau?
I take your point on that. Isn't that what today's for?
Okay, so I think if we just work through the items in the agenda. So so attachment 1, do you want to talk in any more detail about that? It's the restricted rates requirements.
No, I mean, it is just shows you that how the we flowed through from where we started to where we finished. We can't change any of these. I mean, this is where we get. This is where we are in the process. We can't make any changes to the long-term plan. If we do, we lose the audit opinion, and we don't comply with the legislation. So, yeah, I think, as Mayor Kircher said earlier on, I don't think anyone's particularly comfortable at some of the increases, especially in the out years, but they will certainly be subject to change and review through the annual plan process, and as we move through the reform process and get an understanding of where we're finally going to end up. But yeah, just for your information, as is pretty much all of the items from 1 through 5. So it's probably answering questions just on any of those items.
So yeah, certainly see year one as being set in concrete, but it is those following years where there will be opportunities. We will be having annual plan processes, and we'll be looking at how we can potentially get those lower than what they are at the moment. So we don't know exactly what the future is going to hold as to where like the Three Waters will end up. That will be in that 3rd or 4th year where that effect will be really felt. But in the meantime, we'll be looking at whatever savings we can make along the way. We do need to have serious consideration about some of the services that we have. We've added more on. We haven't really taken any away. And we haven't had a good enough conversation, I don't think, with our community about what services they would be happy to give up or to cut back in some sort of way. But essentially, yeah, it's trying to find further efficiencies or actually make some cuts if we want to make some serious dents in the figures that we've got in front of us. So not an easy one, but probably just given the assurance that over these next couple of years that we will be looking seriously at how we can reduce those numbers. That's as we do any year. Councillor Wolseley.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. No, just a question to the team. The rate increases that were shown in the consultation document, and then the rates in the green that we're finally adopting, there was an increase overall. And I just wonder how much of that increase is due to the changes in central government funding, particularly Waka Kotahi and the reduced roading amount received by council, because years 2 and years 3, there is quite a large increase on what went out in the CD. And I was wondering how much of that is due to central government funding.
That was by far the biggest factor that caused the change in those out years.
If I can just respond in the case. Yeah, thank you, Paul. It just shows that once again that we as local government are being severely impacted by central government, and these matters are outside of our control. And I guess we say to our ratepayers, sorry, but we have no option. But that's what was dealt, the hand that was dealt to us.
Yeah, look, I've got a question about the LTP in general, but just a comment about the matter that Councillor Wallstein has raised. It did strike me that when we put the rate rises out in the consultation document, years 2 and 3 were less than year 1. Now the reverse is true. Next year we're predicting 8.53 and 9.30 for the 3rd year. Granted your point about our possibility to reduce that, but I just wonder, too late to change now, but what might the response have been to the idea of smoothing had those figures been included in the consultation document rather than the other way around? As I say, you're right, we can't change anything now, but it is a pointer to some of the comments. It does tend to reinforce, I think, what you said to some extent earlier, Paul, about how it's meant to be the solution to everything, and maybe this the solution to nothing, because in a sense the whole consultation was predicated on some accurate information at the time, but information that subsequently proved to be inaccurate, largely for the reasons Councillor Wallstein's identified. Can I just ask either you or Ian, this is something that arises, if I may, it's a general question, it's not about charges. Going back to the material we got at our last meeting on the 15th of June, and this may also come up in the Treasury report later, but there's a reference at the bottom to LGFA funding. And briefly, it says the charges outlined above have resulted in generally positive cash flows. Level of borrowing from the LGFA has been reduced. This funding reaches its peak in 2026 at $67 million, a decrease of $5 million. Have we seen a breakdown of what we are borrowing for and the terms and the durations of the loans, et al, et cetera? And if not, I don't think we can get it today, but can we have one, please, at some point?
So you will have seen what we're borrowing for, because essentially that was when we went through the list of all the approved projects, it had the funding sources identified against them and highlighted those that would be funded by way of debt. In terms of the structure of the financing, that's something that we will work on with our Treasury advisors once we actually get more certainty around the level of debt we require and what's the best structure. So that will come back through council and highlight and really set out how we're going to achieve that most effectively.
I suppose, sorry, a supplementary question. If I know that we've got big things like the cultural facilities program and the sports and events centre, but I was wondering about borrowing in relation to depreciation, because I would have thought that most of the infrastructure work we are going to be doing should and would be covered by our depreciation funding.
Some of it will be, but we have invested some of those funds for a net positive gain in terms of the return on the investment versus the cost of the fund. So we will need to do some borrowing for that. But there is an awful lot of service level increase indicated over these 10 years. And we certainly need to borrow for that. And then the growth component, which a lot of times we will borrow in advance and then fund through the collection of development contributions.
Yes.
Just to try and give an example, we've got some water schemes that we're looking at spending $2 million on upgrading the water supplies and treating it and so forth as required by the law. There will be parts of those where there's some replacing other elements of the system which has got some depreciation against it. So of that 2 million, you might have a couple of $100,000 which can be funded through depreciation, but the other 1.8 has to be funded basically through loan and then repaid via rates over a longer period of time. So that's just an example of how that works. And when we've got still half a dozen water schemes like that, and you've got some wastewater schemes where we may have, for example, if you look at the wastewater for the Oamaru plant, Tiwai Duncan Road, I think we're planning to put another pond onto there to increase the capacity. Now we will have some development contributions which can go towards that. The rest of it will be loan funded, potentially to be repaid through development contributions, so that the debt goes up, but it's not all about repaying it through rates. There are other mechanisms for some parts of that, and so it's getting, from the finance team, I think the balance for them is getting it right between how much have we got in the coffers that can be used towards that, how much is actually genuine new upgrade, higher level of service, how much can be paid through development contributions, how much needs to be paid through rates. So it's there's a lot of complex assumptions. I just commend Ian Wells and his team for the detailed work that they have to do, because there's so many different activities, so many different accounts that get impacted on this, and getting them all to be exactly right at the end has been a real mission, but it's something they do every year as they work on these things. So thank you, Ian, for that work. I mean, overall, I think we do have to just back ourselves that in year 2 and 3, we will work hard on the annual plans there to get those numbers down. And I'd still say that rather than smoothing the rates and averaging it, let's try and smooth it by actually getting those numbers down. And, that's where the community will be better off. Okay, so just moving on to the audit opinion, attachment 2, which has that been emailed out?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I had a document I had to sign this morning, letter of representation, which says we've given you all the information and so forth, whatever you come up with. If you've made any mistakes, it's our fault. It's pretty much what we have to sign. If we don't sign it, we don't get an audit opinion. So I dutifully signed it on your behalf, indemnifying the auditor. Anyway, I was very tempted to make note that we did have to sign it. We acknowledged we did have to sign it to get an audit opinion, but I didn't quite get that done before Mr. Hope turned up and wanted it, the signed article. So anyway, we've got the audit opinion, and you know, in defence of Audit New Zealand, they are given the task of how they audit things by the Auditor General. And yeah, us staff yesterday, I think it was, you know, has it been significantly different from this audit process compared to the last long-term plan? And it has been hugely different and much more complex, and looking at a whole lot of additional detail that it actually, you know, it's not that material, because things will be changed before we even get to that point. But they've done it, and they've got the sign off. But the other question I did ask them yesterday was, what's changed in the legislation? And nothing has changed in the legislation. We are just, the bar is being lifted higher and higher and higher to the stage it's at now. I mean, we're paying, I don't know, over $200,000 by the time we do our long-term plan and annual report each year. And then our CCOs are paying tens of thousands of dollars for their audits in the process. So, you know, we've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars going out of our community for this service. Now, they will say this gives us the reassurance that, or our community reassurance that things are being done well. But I think it's just gotten so far beyond, you know, making sure there's good scrutiny, and the figures have been worked well to actually just, yeah, it seems like a job creation scheme more than anything else, to be fair. And it's our community that has to pay for it. And when they say we don't get anything for our rates, well, yes, you can sit there with a warm glow that actually, you know, this has been given a sign off by audit, and you know, and that's 1% of the rates. So there we go. Well, by the time we count in the CCOs, so it is significant, and you know, we are keeping a good number of people employed in audit areas. But anyway, Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Mayor Kircher, and I support you in those. But I'd also like to just say thanks to the council team who are involved in preparing the LTP long-term plan. As has been said before, it's a huge job, and it's like a moving feast. You never know what you're going to face each time you do it. And it's as Mayor Kircher has said, the bar is being lifted higher and higher by government all the time. And I also want to pay thanks to the Audit New Zealand team as well. They receive a fair bit of criticism at times, but they are the meat in the sandwich as well, because they are directed by the Auditor General, the Office of the Auditor General, as to their requirements, and they have to put them into place. So they really have very little option, but they do have a way in which they can carry out their duties with the least disruption to the client, in this case, Waitangi District Council. So it's just something that council has to go through, but I just once again give thanks to the finance team and all the backup supporters behind it who have managed to get this LTP to the stage. And I'd like to just go back to the opinion from the Auditor General. And the opinion is what's called an unqualified opinion. He has no problems with the long-term plan, apart from the 4 matters Mr. Hope mentioned previously, but emphasis of matters, which really are things that we know and are already commented on in the report, but the auditor has chose to make a comment on those as well. But apart from those matters, which are already commented, The rest of the opinion is that it's provides a reasonable basis for the long-term plan, et cetera, et cetera. So well done to the council team, and also thanks to Audit New Zealand.
Thank you for that. So the audit opinion, yeah, as Councillor Wallstein says, is basically signed off. And some adjustments will be made in the long-term plan following this meeting and before it's published officially. Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, just a quick question in regard to that. I'm surprised at the matter of emphasis relating to the Sports and Events Centre. But in response to that comment in there, I mean, I would have thought it was been perfectly clear to everyone that if we don't get the external funding, it won't happen. And that was made clear in the consultation document, as Elliot said. But in relation to this matter of minor edits, is that something that a line, a word, some phrase of emphasis or clarification could be added in response to that matter of emphasis raised by them?
No, as I said, it's not, these aren't criticisms. These are from the auditor highlighting issues to the readers of the document. And they're saying, look, the need to secure third-party funding is critical for that project to go ahead as it's being discussed. And when that's, yeah, it's stating the obvious, but they are sort of in the business of stating the obvious at times.
Okay. So moving on from that one, Appendix 3 was just that was the 500-page document that we probably haven't, I don't know, not too many of us have probably gone and read through the whole thing. So Councillor Thompson did have a bit of a sleepless night the other night and delved into it.
2 days.
Excellent. So, no, very good. That would certainly get you up to speed on a lot of things. So, excellent. Appendix 4 is the fees and charges. So, what I want to do is just work our way through those and just see if there's any comments on any of them. Do you want to explain what process has happened on these?
Could we possibly do 1 through 5 first and then do fees and charges?
Yeah, good idea.
Because they're not part of the LTP. Essentially, they don't, the impact is immaterial on the overall revenue. So at least we'd get that bit done and then have a separate, almost a separate discussion about the fees and charges. That's all right.
Yep, no, that's as good as gold. It will allow some of the staff to head back and start work on the next LTP. Okay, just the annual plan. Okay, so I'm going to go through, we've got 1, notes the level of rate increase indicated for each year of the 10-year plan. Number 2, can you tell us what the revised wording is on that?
2 is receives the Audit New Zealand audit report on the draft 2021-31 long-term plan, attachment 2, and notes that the report is to be included in the 2021-31 long-term plan. 3, adopts the 2021-31 long-term plan, which is attachment 3, pursuant to section 93 of the Local Government Act 2002. 4, notes that officers may make necessary minor edits and corrections to the 2021-31 long-term plan prior to the printing and publishing of the document. 5, notes that the 2021-31 long-term plan must be made publicly available prior to 29 July 2021.
Okay. Number 4, I'd just like to amend that slightly. So they've got the wording about the minor edits. I would like after that just test the room, which council considered to be non-material, and then carry it on from there. I mean, this is our decision. This is how we see our long-term plan. And we should be able to adopt our long-term plan accordingly. So I'm just see if there's any appetite for that minor change. I mean, you know, what's the point of us being here actually if we've got other people making decisions for us and telling us what we have to decide? It's the reality of it. Sorry to the auditors who may be listening on. That's the reality. So I'll move 1 through 5 with that minor edit.
I'm happy to second, but with one very minor amendment, which is non-controversial. I don't think the words in brackets, attachment 2, placeholder, and attachment 3 need to be in these. That's information for us for this agenda. The recommendations are that we adopt the Audit New Zealand audit report and the 2021-31 long-term plan. And I think those words in brackets can be deleted from these resolutions. But on that, and if you're happy with that, I'll second it. And
Yeah, no, I don't see any problem with that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll put that. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? That's carried. And again, thank you very much to all of the staff, as Paul mentioned, for all of the hard work. It has been a very long process, and there's been a lot of toing and froing and so forth. It's not quite over because we've still got letters to send out to submitters, and they'll be getting sent out over the next week. And thanks to the staff who have personalising those as much as possible. I know that takes quite a while. I've done it before. And when we've got some 450, I think, submissions, yeah, it's appreciable. Special note would be just to note that this is Mr. Searle's last long-term plan, and I don't know whether this is the one that broke the camel's back, but Mr. Searle, thank you very much for your work over the last 7 years. I think is this latest stint you've done for Waitaki District Council, and thank you very much for your dedication to this particular job of getting the long-term plan through and signed off.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. There's a nickname that we give some employees in the council. They're called boomerang employees. That's where they've been here, left and come back. You say that my latest stint has been 7 years, so perhaps in another 7 I will be back to do more LTPs.
Well, we would welcome you back with open arms, I'm sure. So thank you. Not sure how many of us will be here. Thank you very much. Okay. So just double check where we're at. So we're just going on to attachment 4. It's page 49. So I'll just work through the pages reasonably quickly. So anything on 49, 50, Deputy Mayor.
Just a question, there's not much in it, but the top of page 50 there, the credit card charges, we're charging people more to pay online than to go in person, which I would have thought would save us time and money. So I was confused as to why I would encourage that.
All we're doing is recovering the fee that we get charged for the credit card transaction. So it is more expensive online because there are 2 entities involved rather than just one when we receive a credit card.
I think for the minor difference, 0.5%, I think it would be better to have a uniform charge and just accept where actually we're, you know, what might take longer or cost a little bit more on one hand, we're saving on the other because they're not having to come in.
Okay. Yep. No, I mean, as the Mayor said, this is your opportunity to make a decision. We'll just reflect those in the final schedule.
Just note also on that page, Waihinau Centre has a charge for sending faxes. Do they still do that?
You might be better to ask Councillor Thompson about the state of play in Waihinau.
Councillor Thompson.
We're actually looking at replacing the pigeon cages and the fire for the smoke signals.
Right. Well, it sounds like a major upgrade. So hopefully we've got the funding in there for that. No, thank you. It's one of those things that, you know, things change so quickly within that, you know, everything done by fax and then it's like nothing, hardly. Right, anything on page 51? 52? 53?
Look, it's a relatively minor matter. But if you look at the overdues for the library, the proposal is that they're not going to be charged at all. And the rationale is to reduce that this will reduce barriers to access to the libraries. Now, my concern is effectively that's going to penalise other readers and borrowers. If there's a popular book and somebody wants to read it, right, then one of the things that, I mean, I've just had a reminder that there's a book due soon. I don't want to get pinged for a fine, so I'll make sure it's back. Now, if there's a queue of people waiting to read that book, and often with the popular novels and so on there is, somebody who doesn't have to pay a fine, oh, well, that's all right, I won't bother, you know, I'm okay. And I just think that is going to have the unintended consequence of penalising other library borrowers. And I would not take that. I'd not take that provision. I mean, the fine can be waived at the discretion of librarians if they wish, but to take it out altogether, I just think is going to, it won't hurt us much, but it will hurt other readers. So I don't think that should be done, personally.
Councillor Tavendale?
I do see a problem with that, and maybe the final notice or second notice or something at the end might be where a fee is done, but quite often, you know, I think it's actually probably a good thing. If you're going to have people get big bills and then just not come back, we do end up having that problem of the library not being accessible. And I think we're there for a service to try and lend books out and encourage people in the doors. I think it's not a bad call.
Yeah, I think that there does need to be some incentive, I think, for people to get books back on time and, you know, okay, let them away with one notice. But I think, yeah, that some charge on the second. I mean, basically staff have got to take the time to send out 2 notices, and, you know, if the second one, if they still haven't brought the book back, I think keeping that fee in there would be appropriate. And, you know, there can be other people waiting for those books as well. So it's making sure that, you know, I mean, it's like saying, well, we shouldn't charge people for overstaying in car parks because that's, you know, they're not able to access the shops. They've still got access, they still can go and so forth, you know. So no, I think, I mean, this is a highly subsidised service, and I think there's an opportunity to just have a charge on that, particularly the second reminder.
So you're recommending free parking?
No. We haven't done the study on how exactly that would carry forward, and it would be a rate requirement, which we haven't got funded in our rates. So unless you would want to increase the rates further.
No, I'm good.
Okay, councillors, are you happy that we reinstate the second notice?
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. I just wanted to add in answer to Jim's question, the process to still recover the book will take place regardless of whether or not there's a fine attached to it. And we've had the fines being waived in relation to response to COVID for some time, and the contact with staff still to chase that book, we're still getting them back. So it's not an issue that those resources won't be there. There may be the odd one or two, but that's probably happening now. So I don't see it having a major impact.
Okay, thank you.
I think we should do what you suggested, keep the fine in place.
Okay, I think that's where we end up. So just check what page are we on to next? I've skipped off it. 54. Okay, thank you. Anything else? 54, 55, 56. Um, 57. Just got one there, which is the weekend surcharge for burials, and I see Mr. Van Spek here. Yeah, I have questioned the justification for this some time ago, and I can't remember the exact reply I got back, but there is some inconsistency with some of the amounts in there. One's $450 more, one's $500 more, and so forth. If it's the type of thing where I would have thought that you know, if the sexton was getting paid more for that weekend, then it would be a reasonably fixed amount extra. So, Mr. Van Spek, do you have any comments on that for us? Can you come over to speak the microphone? Thanks. Just push the button on the right.
Yeah, these charges have been largely historic, and we haven't really gone back and inquired as the basis of the difference. My understanding is that it probably was because of the time involved with a burial versus a actual interment. But as to exactly how that was calculated back in the day, I can't tell you.
Yeah, it's I think looking at adult burials, $450 extra for weekend and public holidays, and children burials, $500 extra, for example. So what I'd like is you know, just whether we can leave them as is for now, but I think if some work can be done on, you know, how much extra is the sexton being paid by his employer, you know, his contractor, and you know, is that reflective of what we should be charging? I mean, this is, you know, when people are having to use this service, it's a pretty stressful time, and yeah, we want to make sure that we're not adding to it with excessive fees. And I certainly, you know, I think when I raised it last time, one of the challenges was it was during a lockdown of Auckland, and the ability for people to get to a funeral and so on was more limited, and it all came around, you know, the timing for people to be able to get there, how many people could be there, and so on, as to when the funeral needed to be. So I think, you know, if we can just look at that, that would be appreciated. Anything else on that page?
Yes. Sorry.
Yep, Councillor.
Question perhaps to
Hopkins.
Mr. Van der Speer. Are staff on contract, or is I mean, the notion of overtime being paid at weekends is quite unusual now, I would have thought. Normally people have a contract to do a given amount of work on whatever day it is. And I'm just wondering, picking up on the Mayor's point, do we need to distinguish between burial costs on weekdays and on Saturdays, Sundays, or public holidays possibly, but the weekends? I mean, couldn't there just be a charge for such a burial 7 days a week?
Sorry,
We've asked and Mr. Van der Speek to bring back some information. Sorry, that's not working. Leave as it is today, and we will get the information, come back on what justification there is. So, because otherwise we don't know whether, if we want to keep it the same price increase the base price or just decrease the weekend price. So anyway, that's what we're on. Councillor Wallstein?
Thank you, Mayor Kirch. I was just going to comment that the only reason for the difference is that when before it was $500 in every category, but this year the adult burial weekdays has been increased by $50, and that's brought the difference between the weekend down to $450. So that's the only reason for the change from 500. So it's a very simple change to increase the adult burial Saturday, Sunday public holidays to $16.50, and that retains $500 extra in the weekend for every category if it is required.
Okay, we'll look at that one. We're a bit overdue to take a break, and we've got some people waiting to meet us over the morning tea. So we're going to take a break now, and just check the timetable. So we'll be back in 20 minutes. So yeah, just take a short break. So those watching on live stream can check back in at 10:40. Thanks very much. Okay, I think, yep, just a wee glitch as the microphones decided they wanted to restart. So welcome back, everyone. We're just working on the fees and charges, going through those. Probably a few of you, like me, had page 58 noted as having a couple of mistakes on it. So Mr. Van der Speck's spoken to me about those, and we'll address those just to start off with. So Eric, hand over to you. No. So if is yours working, Mr. Wells? Okay, now yours is going, Eric. So if you can carry on, thanks.
I'd love
All right, thank you. As I was just saying, a couple of incorrect fees on the schedule here. Based on the workshop that we had with council a month or so ago, we're proposing that the season tickets for the lakes camping for the season is $5.50 and the half season tickets $3.50. The other anomaly there is we've incorrectly removed the fee for the season tickets from Dunback when it should be from Duntroon based on the request from the DVDA.
Okay, so everyone's got that. So the reason for the reasonably significant increase in the season camp fee is because at the moment we've got that service being subsidised by rates, and council has decided that it needed to be more sustainable, and we need to recover the costs from the activity itself, not through rates, not having people pay rates to help other people have holidays. So it is what it is. And it also, I think, is looking at the upgrades that we're looking at up at the lakes with the camp water systems and so forth. So there is going to be an increased level of service there as well. But anyway, has anyone got any other comments around any of those? Councillor Wallstein and then Councillor Hopkins.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be 400 proposed, yes.
And Duntroon would be.
Duntroon will not have a season fee.
Oh, right, now we're live, right. The season ticket for Waitaki Lakes has been increased because many people staying there are not residents of Waitaki District. Does that not apply to Dunback as well? And should the Dunback season pass not have increased also because of the out of area people using that camping ground?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, they are likely to be out of the district as well. However, we know there are concerns amongst that community about the level of our fees at the campsite there already.
Councillor Hopkins.
So it looks as though, I'm just trying to get a handle on this, and apologies. By mistake, we've attributed a reduction of a fee or removal of a fee for Dunback because the DDDA requested it. But then underneath that, there is a fee for the Duntroon Domain Camping Grounds, 400, which I think you just said in response to Councillor Wallstein's question isn't going to be there at all. Is that right?
So the fees, as they should read, would be no season fee for Duntroon, and there would be a $400 season fee for Dunback. The DDDA manage the Duntroon camp on our behalf, and they have an on-site camp manager that works on their behalf, and they have requested that we remove the season fee. They have not experienced anybody has requested or used that in the past. The season fees for both Duntroon and Dunback were something that was only introduced 1 or 2 years ago to try to provide some consistency with the lakes camping. However, there's not the same demand as what there is in the lakes camping areas.
Okay, so if we can move to page 59. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mayor, could you just 59, 60 and 59 and 60 include a lot of charges for planning, which are very, very significantly increased. The rationale in each instance where the increase is provided is to better match actual costs. And these are things like limited notification consents for land use, non-notified resource consent, sundry certifications, post-consent procedures. All I'm saying is this, and designation or heritage order, up $500, which is a lot. I just think that we need some more information about that. We just need to work through those. And I don't think they should be increased until we've had a chance to talk them over. I think they should be held until we've had a chance to kind of unpack a bit of this, find out what's going on and why these are costing so much more relative to others. Just doesn't quite gel at the moment, with me anyway.
Councillor Tevner.
I tend to agree, they're quite massive, and there may be really good reasons behind it, but I think we just need to actually understand what they are, what they're for, how they align with other councils and what they're doing and all that kind of stuff. So, are we able to just kind of pause on those increases until we've had that chance to have that discussion?
Just my 2 cents worth, because I also signalled the same or noted the same thing. The difference between a non-notified consent to a limited notified consent to a fully notified consent, there's just seemed to be quite a significant gap between those first two, whereas a limited notification, yes, there's more work, but trying to get an understanding why it is so much more than a non-notified consent. Generally, it's the person who's seeking the application that will be often the one going and collecting agreements from neighbours or whatever, the directly affected parties. And just be good to have a better understanding before we before we agree to quite significant increases there. Mr. Cook, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I just want to point out that these are purely changes in deposits. There's no actual increase suggested in the document. It is to reflect just more accurately the end cost. So I'll take on board your points, and we're happy to review the overall fees and differentials in planning. But this is purely just to reflect more accurately what the end cost of the item is, rather than based on some feedback we had from customers, where they wanted to have a better understanding when they embarked on the project.
Yeah, no, that's appreciated. I think the question is, are we being fair with what is being charged through? I mean, they do need to reflect what the actual cost is, but are our actual costs greater for some of these services, and they should be. And, you know, is there efficiencies that we can find? And I think the Deputy Mayor mentioned comparatives with other councils. Is there some, are we on a, you know, even footing when we start looking at some of the differences? So if we can get that information, that would be quite handy. Councillor Williams.
I just wanted to point out, it's not just the ones that have changed that, I know, I realise it's just a deposit, but also the one that concerned me was the plan change, $20,000, even though it's just a deposit. We're about to go through some huge district plan changes, which may involve us reviewing.
No.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Which may involve us having to look at these things more often. And so I just want to make sure that we do thoroughly look at everything here and that we're not setting ourselves up for having some pretty unhappy people out there. Thanks.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, that charge, which I think is high as well, but it's been debated and signed off by councils previously, is only if somebody wishes to initiate a privately initiated plan change. So in other words, if somebody wanted to rezone Palmerston and make it capable of having 10-storey buildings, for the sake of argument, on the main street, that might be a plan change, and there's an awful lot of work associated with that for our planners, and that is the only thing that the $20,000 deposit is required for. So it's a privately initiated request for a plan change. Nothing else would attract that fee.
Exactly.
Mm.
Okay, so further information to come through before we change those ones. Okay, anything on page 60?
Well, it was the same ones that I raised earlier.
61. Just the one question that I've got is a lot of the harbour services, no change. I think this is one where the costs of maintaining the breakwater and keeping a safe harbour for users does need to be recognised, and we should be at least keeping keep that moving at least with the rate of inflation. It's still a very, very small contribution towards the overall cost which ratepayers pay, but there does, I think, need to be some recognition that our costs in that area are only increasing, and they increase every year. So I'd like to see some equity in there on that one. Any comments from Mr. Hope, acting assets?
Certainly acknowledge the point, and prefer we bring back some information potentially through the Harvey Rera Committee just on these charges and what would be appropriate, particularly with reference to similar facilities. That's all right.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on page 61? Councillor Holding, sorry.
Yeah, I just raised earlier just an item above it in the landing fees at the airport. For me, there's not enough information there. Is that something that has come through a committee? And I mean, it may or may not have some pretty significant repercussions for customers out there. And I know the discussion with a bit more strategy. I'd just like to know what it means before I'd sign that one off.
Mr. Hope, any comment?
Sorry, yeah, it was just looking at the rather unusual amounts described in the schedule. I'd need to confirm it, but I believe they've just had inflation applied to them from the previously agreed amount.
You probably won't. Well, goodness, Welsh. I mean, my question is just around the equity of helicopters being charged the same as fixed wing aircraft. You know, when we're looking at a project of some, I think, $600,000 for a runway, which helicopters really don't use much. So, you know, I think there is a case for having a differential in there. You know, they might make use of some of the landing lights and things perhaps, but even then it's it may not be the case. But I think yeah, a little more equity rather than trying to just make everything the same based on weight would be good. Mr. Wells and then Councillor Wallstein.
So just to say that this was explained to me as a complete change in the basis for operating the airport, and the reason for the odd amounts, as Paul points out, is because I was given fees that were GST exclusive, but all the fees in our fees and charges are inclusive. So I've simply added GST to those numbers, which does make them look kind of odd.
Yes, yeah, just a question regarding the back to the Oamaru Harbour. I actually wonder whether the extra loading on the charges there for a non-ratepayer are enough. For example, like a Holmes Wharf berth per annum for ratepayer, $1,500, but a non-ratepayer, $1,800. I think for a non-ratepayer to want to berth for a full year at the Holmes Wharf, $300 more than a ratepayer, I think they should probably pay a higher premium to come here and use our harbour. The same applies to the harbour mooring per annum. So whether that was considered by the team on the way through, or whether there should be an increased charge.
Okay, we'll have that come back to us. But Mr. Hope, any other comment?
No, no, sorry. I mean, we said we'd bring back some more information, and we will certainly take account of that comment, Councillor Wallstein.
Just going back to the airport, sorry to be chopping and changing around. Yeah, I mean, this is a problem when we don't have a business plan or any sort of strategy for the airport. And I think the sooner we can get that, the better, so we can understand what is our policy around this, what is the direction that we're giving staff. If we can set good direction, then we can, you know, basically let them get on with it, and things don't have to keep coming back to us. But it's when there's a lack of clear direction, that's when you get these situations. So just make that push for getting on with that airport development / business plan. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. Look, I just don't. I'm not. Well, I'm saying we're given an explanation here, so for simplicity and consistency. Or landing fee charges contribute towards the airport being cost neutral. And Mr. Wells has said he's been told this is a new approach. What I not aware of is that we've had a chance to discuss the new approach, and I don't believe these charges should be put in place until we've talked them through. And I mean, I'm talking about all the ones in red or pink, salmon pink. I just don't think they should be imposed without us actually discussing them, exploring the rationale and signing them off. I really don't.
Yeah, no, that's what we're asking for. Councillor Kingham.
Yeah, look, I fully agree with you, Mayor Kircher, and also Councillor Hopkins on your points with regard to the airport. It's not only us that's not quite sure, I'm sure even them out there are not quite sure of their position. So I think there's a real opportunity for us now to have a meeting with them, get on the same page if we can, and certainly get some sort of strategy and some sort of plans going forward. It is quite important for them and us.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. Okay, so that's more information there. Right, page 62. Councillor Hopkins.
was just going to ask.
Sorry, I was going to raise again the fact that it may be unavoidable, I don't know, but if you look at the charges we are imposing on building consents for work between 0 and 5,000 and between 0 and or between 5,000 and 20,000 or 19,999. The fee for the first is 10% of the work itself. And I mean, I can see why the fees are a smaller percentage, the more expensive the work is. But I do think those two fees are unduly punitive, and how we kind of tease that out and sort it out and where the costs sit is another matter. But it continues to trouble me. That's all.
Would you like me to stand in order to get a picture of my beautiful face? I'm going to stand in the corner. So when I stand in the corner, I can't see my notes, but there's I can assure councillors there's a lot of working behind this to get to these fees. When they went up based on your approval of the works last year, so there was no proposed increases this year. When they went up last year, we did go through that mechanics and explain it. The reason why the $5,000 one is so much higher is it does include a chunk of work which has to be done on every single consent. So the fact that it's a small amount of work, it still needs a CCC, it still needs 2 inspections, and you quite quickly get up to that sort of money when you charge per hourly rate for those things. That is the example of economies of scale. The bigger you build, the less times that we still have to look at it, but it's more cost effective. Other than causing larger consents to actually pay more, I don't see any other way of getting around that. Under 5,000 is generally log solid fuel heaters, and solid fuel heaters have a separate fee which we are already subsidising through other works. So solid fuel heaters, I think off the top of my head, is 360, and is the other building consents would be subsidising that for rates payment. We're losing money at that figure.
Yeah, I'd just like to back up what Councillor Hopkins said. Like, in terms of the rate between 5,001 and 19,999, especially the habitable one, if you're at the top end of the scale, if you're spending just on your $20,000, 2,076 is, it's a fair 20% of your overall cost. But if you're at the lower end, if you're just over, say, 6,000, $2,000 fees is a third of your cost of your build. So it does seem to be out of proportion to the lower end of that bracket. And I wonder whether there should be a bracket of 5 to 10 and then 10 to 20 maybe, to try and stop that real punitive charge at the lower end of that building, because that would cover like just building on perhaps an ensuite bathroom onto a house or an extra bedroom, and having to pay a fee of 2,076 does seem rather high.
Do you have any further comment?
Let the camera get the focus. I'm happy to bring the workings back to a workshop to explain them, and then councillors can decide the direction forward from there.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, this would be an area that I get as much traffic from ratepayers as anyone. I know it's easy to gloss over the fact that we need to have some compliance in what goes on, but it tends to be viewed by the ratepayer as unproductive money. When you start spending, and in my particular case, I built a shed and the fees equated to 12.5% of the value of the shed. So I would appreciate a briefing, because I find it hard to actually sell this to people when they come to me with criticism. So I'd like to get some more briefing around it so we can justify what we're charging.
Yep, we'll get that sorted. I think most of the councillors have had quite a bit of background to this, and whether it's a case of you just spending some time with the team and anyone else that wants to, we'll set up an opportunity for that to happen. It is, it's trying to take into account all the different circumstances and so on with a flat fee and give certainty around that. But it's, that balancing act of doing that versus, where does it actually fall on the actual costs, which are all subsidised by rates along the way as well. So, so note taken on that one. Okay, anything else on page 62, 63, 64, 65, 66. I've just got a comment myself on that one. We've farmed out the food control work and some of the other those other inspections and so on that are required for businesses to get certificates that they meet the health standards, etc. One bit of feedback I've had is that the people that we are using could be a little more efficient as far as, one example where they went and we're at a business for several hours. It's quite a bit of time spent just chatting, but then the business got charged for all of the time. So it just probably that wee bit of scrutiny. We want them to be efficient and effective, and these are our ratepayers that they're what we're charging on their behalf, and it's trying to make sure that that is fair and actually represents the work being done, not necessarily discussing the weather or whatever else might have been in there. So just ask for that reassurance, Mr. Cook.
I would just like to say that we did investigate that particular case that you referred to, and that individual premises was on the brink of losing their food registration. The owner's interpretation of chat was actually talking them through what they needed to achieve, and it resulted in them being able to maintain their license on that day rather than actually losing their food registration.
Yeah, and what they described, what they were talking about, wasn't about directly on about the business. So just ask staff to keep an eye on that and make sure that we are delivering well for our ratepayers. But thank you. Okay, anything else on page 66, 67, 68, 69, 70?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, a couple of things on
microphone.
A couple of things on 70 and 71. There's a reference to please refer to the development contribution policy. Click here for more information. Just a question to whomsoever, Paul, Roger, is this a public document? In which case, isn't there an argument for having the DC charge as part of it, not sort of requiring people to go chasing them elsewhere?
Because the DC policy is so complicated, trying to actually summarise it into this type of format is actually impractical and will give ratepayers the wrong impression that they need to look at the policy document and the fee schedule.
Thank you for that. Well, then the other question I have on page 70 is just looking down the bottom there at these various roading ones, corridor access request for global single, the 690, 287, which has gone up 231. The first one is a totally new fee. There's big increases. What are these, and why again are they going up so high, or why are the charges increasing so much?
Sorry, I can't answer that question. not familiar with this fee schedule.
Well, again, then can we get more information before they're locked in place, please?
Certainly can.
Councillor Wallstein.
Yes, I'm sorry to go back to page 68, which is the parking control metered parking. Should the fee schedule not include reference to the free parking? Is it free parking? Is it till 10 in the morning? It's just that states there from just an hourly rate.
We can include that.
I mean, we don't have hours of operations for a lot of things, but yeah, just acknowledging if you do that, then it's going to be, you know, we're going to have to be Saturday, Sunday, so, you know, the whole week. So it's adding quite a few more lines as opposed to what's actually just on the meters. I don't know that. I don't know that adds a lot of value in this particular document, but if staff can easily add it, then just add it. Okay, anything else on 70? 71? 72? Okay, so we'll go back to the original motion, number 6. Which was received and notes the schedule of fees and charges. So we modify that to adopt the schedule of fees and charges as amended for the 2021-22 financial year, and 7, note that further information will be brought back to council as soon as possible.
Can I just ask a question on that?
Yep.
Just the ones that we are questioning, are they just remain status quo until those discussions, or I'm just trying to understand the implication of what you've.
Yeah, I think we need to know what the timing will be for these to come back and what might happen in the meantime. You either put them up and at the risk of reducing them again, or you leave them where they are at the risk of under charging what needs to be charged. So, Mr. Hope.
Certainly my intent would have been that we maintain the fees as they are, that we get these essentially either through a committee or through to the next council meeting so we can action these as quickly as possible. I mean, the work's been done, it just wasn't presented in this report, and it's generally a request for more information, which we should be able to provide pretty readily. Therefore, there shouldn't be too much delay in getting these back in front of you. So, you know, a month or 6 weeks is not going to make a material difference to the revenue.
So are we better to, rather than adopt, receive a note with more information to come for an adoption at a later point?
I don't believe so, because we actually wanted, there's changes in there which we do want to adopt and we need to adopt, and, you know, like camping and so forth. So I think we are better to do that. Yeah, there's quite a few that will stay the same until we hear back, but there are some that do need to change whichever way. So yeah, my preference is that we do adopt what's there, other than the ones we've raised questions about. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mayor Kircher, I have a little bit of concern in some instances. We've just said, for the sake of argument, thanks to the matters raised by Councillor Holding, that we want to have a look at all the airport charges. Now, even if we put the fees and charges that are in front of us today in place, aeroplanes and helicopters are going to be taking off and landing quite frequently in the next month, and will be receiving charges which we want to actually examine and sign off before they're imposed. So there are, in some instances, I think, grounds for saying that we will put increases or new charges on hold. In other cases, it may well be that they should be implemented and could be implemented, but I just raise that point.
That's exactly what I've just said. There are ones that we need to change, so we should be changing them. There are other ones which we have questioned, and we should be leaving them, as Mr. Hope said, leave them where they are at until we've had a chance to consider them.
But the CE's advice was keep everything as it is and have a look at it in a month. Well, that's what I heard him say. Sorry, did I misunderstand
You heard differently to everyone else, I hope.
No, it was essentially in those areas where you raised questions to hold those.
Councillor Tamader.
I'm happy to second on that. priority.
Okay, so I moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor.
Recommendation 7 again, please.
So 6 is adopts the schedule of fees and charges as amended for the 2021-22 financial year, and 7 requests further information on the identified charges to be brought back to council for a decision to be made as soon as possible. So in the meantime, that they will stay as they are. Okay, any further discussion on that? Put it, those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, moving through to 7.2 resolution to set the rates. So a little bit of a decision on this one. Mr. Hope, do you want to just run through explanation on this report, please?
So as is highlighted each year, this is usually the longest resolution you will pass in each year. It goes from page 73 to 79, I believe it is. This is essentially a direct reflection of what is in the first year of the long-term plan. Can't change the numbers, but we can certainly answer questions about them.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Look, I just have one very simple question. On page 79, there's a reference, and apologies for not noticing this in earlier years, but it says that rates will be collected by 4 equal quarterly instalments due on the following dates or the first working day after this date. It did occur to me when I read that, why don't we just make it a working day? Or is there something in statute that means you have to have those dates in your rates resolution?
Yeah, sorry, the Local Government Rating Act is very prescriptive in terms of the dates between when you set things and when you can collect them and when you can set penalties. So it is easier to refer to specific dates.
But can we have a working day as the specific date? That's my question. Or does it have to be this date?
So it is a lot cleaner if it is the dates that we've specified in it, even if they do fall on a weekend and we take them forward. Otherwise, it gets very complicated and has, like everything to do with rates, the potential to have some unintended consequences by doing these things.
Councillor Wallstein.
Not a question, but just a comment following up from the last question. The instalment but does state or the first working day after this date. So that covers that. If it was a weekend, it's already covered in the resolution.
Great point. Okay. Someone like to move? Councillor McRovey. Deputy Mayor Tavendale. Thank you. Any commentary? No. I'll put it. Those in favour, please say aye. Those against? That is carried. Thank you. Now moving on to page 82. Yep. Treasury strategy.
Mr. Wells leaned back, which must mean I'm supposed to answer any questions, but I'll introduce. Look, I mean, usually this goes through the Performance Audit and Risk Committee. However, we've gotten a wee bit out of sequence with these, so good practice is actually to have your strategy in place before the start of the quarter. So that's why we've moved into this council meeting. I think as we get sort of more into the treasury space. I think we will need to review the strategy and the format of it and the information that is presented. So we'll discuss that firstly with our treasury advisors and then come up with an alternative and work that through the Performance Audit and Risk Committee. So it's really just it's pretty much a holding pattern for the first quarter. And really a continuation of what we did in the last quarter, which is, we continue to investigate raising additional loan depending on cash flows and putting some other measures in place. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Hopkins?
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. Look, it's Mr. Wells, Mr. Hope. Page 86, you've got the future requirements. It's not the Treasury policy for the next quarter or first quarter. But just looking at the LTP projects that borrowings will be at for the following levels, you've got then the years 2022 through to 2031. I've tallied that up to a total of $683.5 million. Is that what we are going to be borrowing from the LGF?
No.
It's not. Well, that's fine. That's why I'm
Do not
asking.
go to Councillor Hopkins for financial advice.
No, that's why I'm asking.
Mr. Hope.
No, look, that, and it's actually changed a wee bit with the subsequent versions. That is the peak amount in that year. So it's essentially highlighting the peaks in a chart and across time, not cumulative.
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But I mean, a person who's looking at the agenda might well just tally them up. So what we're saying is that, look, that in the year 2026, the maximum amount we will be sort of going to the LGFA for is 72 million, and it'll never be more than that.
I think under the revised figures, it's 65. And that's
Oh, right, okay.
and the very big assumption that we get everything done at cost what we've estimated, and we're still responsible for Three Waters.
I think I can almost guarantee it won't be that much. It'll be something different because we won't be, what we're predicting that we're going to do in 5 or 6 years will change between now and then. And so there may be more, there may be less, but time will tell. We may have other revenue that comes in, such as what may happen with Three Waters, where we actually lose a lot of debt and actually get some other revenue coming in to offset the loss of Three Waters infrastructure. So it could be a very different picture in 5 years.
Look, apologies. All I'm saying, I was looking at the earlier documents, we're borrowing 67 or whatever, and I'm suddenly, I thought, do tally these up? Do we not? And I'm very relieved. I'm sorry if it was a silly question, but I'm very relieved to hear that it's not cumulative. Maybe there's a few people out there who thought it might have been.
Good as gold. Councillor Williams.
Mine wasn't, I didn't automatically think it was cumulative, but I did have alarm bells rise from reading that sentence. I mean, the whole idea of us doing the LGFA funding was that it was a really sensible decision for us to make. But the way that this was worded at the beginning, where it says that we project an ongoing requirement for further LGFA funding, made me fear, it was almost like a move from, we were doing it because it was the most sensible way of funding things, and now it's like we depend heavily on it. So that was one thing that was a little bit of an alarm bell to me when I was reading this particular paragraph. And I wondered if we could word it, maybe add a little bit more of a description in there, just to make sure it is clear to someone reading on the outside that, it's all about funding for the right level of, percent, whatever, just to make more clear.
And I thank you for the feedback. We'll take that on board and sort of add some of that explanation into the revised strategy going forward.
Yeah, I think yeah, a couple of extra sentences can make all the difference. It's been predicted for quite some time that we will get into debt. What we're not seeing there is the offset of our investments and so on in the meantime, and it doesn't show when they start feeding back in and reducing the debt, even though our expenditure still is being maintained at a high level as we keep investing more and more into infrastructure. But again, 3, 4, 5 years down the track, if we don't do Three Waters, it will be very, very different. So, so that's that. Any other questions? Councillor McRoby.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just why are we adopting a treasury strategy quarterly? Have I missed something there, or is it normally you adopt the treasury strategy annually and then review it quarterly? Is that I'm being
Because our treasury policy says we'll adopt one quarterly. So
well,
that's
my question is then, why does it say that?
Because the debt piece, I suppose, is relatively, we can set that across the 12 months, but some of the smaller pieces of it, it is more appropriate to both have the policy on a shorter term basis, especially the way we were investing any surplus funds. And I think it's also, we report against it on a quarterly basis. So it was just, essentially it was both pieces be done quarterly.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher. I'd just like to move the resolution.
Okay, so move Councillor Wallstein, second Councillor Thompson. I do have just one suggestion for a change, and that's on page 84. On the first line, council has decided in the past to utilise surplus funds. It makes it sound like there's no other purpose for those. So it's, you know, these are reserve funds that are not needed for that purpose at that stage. So we would just have some modified wording. Just to recognise that would be good. So Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, just speaking to the recommendation, I'm happy to support it, but I do think it might be helpful for the mover and seconder to just amend it slightly so that it reads that council adopts the proposed treasury strategy. I mean, at the moment, it could be anyone that anyone fancies. It just says we'll adopt a treasury strategy. I think it should say the proposed treasury strategy.
Or just the, yep. Okay, yeah, happy yes. Just the treasury strategy, that's the one. Okay. In favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, that's carried. Thank you. Right, next, moving on to item 7.4 on page 88. This must be what Mr. Van der Speek's been waiting for. Luckily you were here when we were talking cemeteries though. Anyway, hand over to you, Mr. Van der Speek, to introduce this one.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Essentially, this is a current project in the current long-term plan. Council approved a project to replace the paddling pools in the public gardens with a new water play feature. Council allocated $150,000 towards that at the time, with the intention that we would fundraise or get additional funding from community sources. We have managed to secure $56,000 from the Otago Community Trust, but we're still short approximately $75,000. We hope to secure about $15,000 of that through work in kind or other community donations, but we're seeking a $60,000 amount, and we've identified the Lion Foundation as a possible funding source for this. We've had some conversations with them and they are receptive to an application. However, we do need a council resolution to that effect.
Councillor Tavendale.
I'm happy to move it.
Okay, moved and seconded. Councillor. I don't know who had their hand up first. So moves Councillor Tavendale, seconded Councillor Halalali. Thank you. Councillor Tavendale, speaking to that.
Just it'd be really exciting to actually see this completed. It's such a cool project, and we have it done for summer, and you know, this will hopefully help support that happening. Really exciting. It's cool.
Councillor McRoby.
Yes, Mayor, thank you, and I support it as well. But I just thinking about where our future funding applications might be required for in the future. They'll certainly be substantially more than this if we're looking at applying to bodies like the Lion Foundation and Otago Community Trust and others for the Sport and Recreation and Events Centre. And I just wonder whether there might be any other options. It's the only question I'm asking. I support it, but we've got a lot coming up in the next 12 months. And some of these organisations you can only apply for once a year. So are we quite certain that this is absolutely the only place we could get another 60 or 70,000 from, Mr. Van der Spek?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as far as community funding goes, it is the only source we've identified that we can apply to at the moment. With regard to other projects going forward, obviously we are going to be seeking community funding towards that. However, the council may not always be the applicant for those funds. In the case of the event centre, it's more likely to be the friends of the event centre that make that application instead of council.
Councillor Holding, then Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think Ross kind of took part of my question there. I was just wondering how, curious as how we'd let the community know how they can make donations. So I'm sure it'd be pretty well supported out there. The other point, I didn't think I'm going to lose a vote on approaching to get some gifted money, but that's a good take. But yeah, just curious as to how the community could donate if they want to see that happen a bit faster.
So here, Mr. Chair, there was some work done a few months ago with some newspaper articles from some members of the community who I guess were very supportive of this. It didn't eventuate in substantial amounts of donations. However, we can do some further work in that space. We have, or parties that have been involved in the planning of this project have had conversations with other businesses about work in kind possibilities.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher. Yeah, one thought that did occur to me reading this, the drawings, the illustrations from Dougal are very interesting and exciting, but it did occur to me a model that could be in the aquatic centre or even library, just something that shows people might actually also be a trigger for fundraising. And it might even be, let's have see if some of the schools would like to model it. So you have any, but that's just a thought. The only point I would make, I'm happy to support this as well, but I just pose the kind of high level question. As far as I'm aware, the only source of funding the Lion Foundation has is pokies. We have to approve gaming machines in premises. Is there a conflict of interest if we apply, given that we are the agency that sanctions gaming machines? Our council is aware that if we do this, it's $60,000 from gaming machines. As I say, I'm happy to support it, but I just pose that question: is this possibly a conflict of interest?
Look, I don't see it the same way, Councillor Hopkins. I think if there was an application from them to increase the numbers and that was somehow tied to it, then yes, that would create a conflict. But I mean, this is the purpose of gaming machines is essentially to create a charitable fund. It's well monitored and regulated by the Department of Internal Affairs. This is just a funding source that any community-based group can go to.
Speaking to the motion, I certainly support it. I know staff have spent a long time actually on this project, and I just want to get the thing done. I don't want them mucking around building a model. I don't want them to spend any more time going and seeking donations and so on. I just don't think it's a good use of their time for the amount of reward that it's been. As much as we want to diversify where our revenue comes from, I think they have been to that well, and they have got any water out of that well as much as they can. So I just want to hope them to make this application, get the funding, and get on with it. And because there's a lot of other things that we want them to be doing as well, and we don't need to be putting more hurdles in their way. We've got Councillor Williams and then Councillor Kingham.
I think it's obviously it's a great project. Anything that improves our, things that we provide to the community is fantastic, but I'm just wondering if we've looked into the ongoing operational maintenance cost increase, what potentially, obviously that will fall on future ratepayers. So as long as we've looked into all of those details, do you have any ideas of that?
To you, Mr. Chair, we don't think the operational maintenance costs will be significantly different from those of the padding pools at the moment. The padding pools have to be emptied on a regular basis with the water replaced for health reasons. In this case, the water flow will only be there as the kids are playing. They turn it on and off through the pump system. So we don't foresee significant changes in those costs.
Councillor Kingham?
Yeah, look, all I'm going to do is just support what you've just said. I think this is an opportunity to get the job completed in one hit if possible and get on with it and get it done. I mean, we've all spent a lot of time there as either kids, parents or grandparents, and it's a great facility, and let's get it progressing.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? I'm going to put it, those in favour of this, please say aye. Aye. Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We have got the our council controlled organisations coming this afternoon with their statements of intent. So they're all scheduled to come from 12:40. Merrimut Airfield won't be turning up. I did just have a quick discussion with the Governor's advisor about whether we do that now. But I think we've got enough that in the public excluded that will take us through to lunchtime. So I suggest we go into public excluded and we deal with those items. And then when we reconvene in an hour at 12:40, we'll be talking with the CCOs. So Councillor McRoby, you're moving that we go into public excluded. Seconded, Councillor Holding, thank you. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? That's carried unanimously. Okay, so thank you very much for those who have joined us, and we will be back around 12:40 in public. Thank you.